Welcome to a celebration of Nantucket Sound. It's our monthly webinar series, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Audra Parker. I'm the President and CEO of the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. And for those of you who don't know us, we are a nonprofit environmental organization based in Hyannis on Cape Cod. And our long-term mission is the permanent protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound. So with our series, A Celebration of Nantucket Sound, we hope to provide you with an in-depth view of Nantucket Sound's many extraordinary values from a historic standpoint, an economic standpoint, and an environmental standpoint. As part of our work, we are promoting, along with a large coalition of stakeholders, federal legislation to permanently protect Nantucket Sound. And this is really critical because the waters of Nantucket Sound, as you can see from this map, are split between federal jurisdiction and state jurisdiction. If you look in the center, it's federal waters in the darker blue, and state waters run from the shoreline of Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket out 3 miles. And those state waters are protected under the Massachusetts Ocean Sanctuaries Act, while the federal waters are wide open to development. So one of the things that the legislation we're promoting will do is it will improve the consistency between the protections that exist today under state law and that sort of hole in the donut or hole in the center of Nantucket Sound. The second thing that the bill would do is it would designate Nantucket Sound as a National Historic Landmark. And that's the highest level of historic protection possible. And to give you some examples, the entire island of Nantucket is a National Historic Landmark. Wesleyan Grove in Oak Bluffs and Martha's Vineyard is a National Historic Landmark, as is the Kennedy Compound in Hyannisport. And this designation really would leverage Nantucket Sound's rich maritime and its tribal history. In fact, in 2010, the National Park Service determined that Nantucket Sound was what's called a traditional cultural property because of its great importance to the local Wampanoag tribes. So again, the legislation would improve consistency between state protections and those federal waters in the center. It would designate Nantucket Sound as a National Historic Landmark. And third, it would provide many environmental protections to Nantucket Sound to address threats we're facing today, such as diminished water quality, algae blooms, habitat degradation, coastal erosion, and other environmental threats. So this legislation, which again is federal, that we are promoting is called the Nantucket Sound National Historic Landmark Act, and it is supported by many elected officials and about 80 stakeholder groups that represent tens of thousands of individuals. And these groups include towns across the Cape and Islands, historic preservation groups, commercial fishing groups, tribal governments, and many, many others. Just last month, we had great news where the National Congress of American Indians passed a very important resolution supporting the permanent protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound as a sacred site. And the National Congress of American Indians is the oldest tribal organization and represents tribal nations across the United States, including the Mashpee Wampanoag on Cape Cod and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, Aquina on Martha's Vineyard. So that is a little summary of the work we're doing. And so right now I would like to introduce Regina. Regina is our speaker tonight, and she is the Executive Director and Senior Biologist for Whale and Dolphin Conservation North America. She's been active in whale research, conservation, and education since 1990. And her publications include studies on humpback whales, entanglement mitigation, vessel strikes, and ways to protect endangered species. So we're very excited to have Regina join us tonight to discuss marine mammals in and around Nantucket Sound. So hi, Regina, and welcome.
Hi, and thank you for having me. And I just realized I signed in under your account, so I'm not Audra Parker.
That's okay. It'd be horrible if there were two of me. So
twice as much to get to work. My name is Regina Asmutis-Silvia. I'm the Executive Director of Whale and Dolphin Conservation's North American office, and I am going to try and share my screen so we can talk about the marine mammals around Nantucket Sound.
And I'm going to get off, and so you'll only see Regina, and then I'll come back after your presentation and take questions from the audience. And so I'll be back in half an hour or so.
And I hope everybody can see that. Audra, can you see it? Did I share this?
I can see it, and I'm trying to figure out how to stop my video since there's two of us. For some reason, I can't do that. Oh, there I go. Perfect.
Okay, great. We're going to talk about marine mammals in and around Nantucket Sound, and I'm saying in and around, which I'll explain in a minute, as to why the around really matters, maybe even more than the in. Oh, why aren't you working? Let's see if I can get this to, there we go. A little bit about Whale and Dolphin Conservation. We're a global organization of offices in the UK and Germany and Australia, and we work closely with a nonprofit in Argentina. We have projects all over the world, and we work under basically 4 different program areas to try and help whales and dolphins all over. In our office here in North America, we're located in Plymouth, so we're right on Cape Cod Bay, opposite side of Massachusetts from Nantucket Sound, but some of the same marine mammals that inhabit both places. We work here a lot on endangered species, particularly North Atlantic right whales. And so I always try and explain to people like what we do, or sort of through the lens of what people think we do. So my friends think I spend all my time on a boat looking at whales, which would be lovely. Unfortunately, that's not true. My kids, unfortunately, I dragged them to lots of strandings when they were growing up. So that's all they think that I do, is go out and look at dead things. I feel like I spend all of my time at a computer and a messy desk looking at maps and reports and data. And in reality, it's some combination of all of those things. So what we actually do in our office is we do spend a lot of time at meetings, sometimes in person, now through Zoom, a lot of stakeholder group meetings trying to affect policy changes that would benefit marine mammals. We do lobby. I was on a call earlier with a senatorial staffer today trying to get some funding appropriated to help with some issues that are to help with fishing gear. So we do spend some time doing that. We'd love to do education. Obviously, this picture was taken pre-COVID, but we have a life-size inflatable North Atlantic right whale. She's built on the dimensions of a real right whale, and we love taking her out to schools. And we're starting a new curriculum effort we're going to pilot it in Plymouth and Dennis in the spring. So we're really, really excited about that. And we do go respond to strandings. So that occasionally is true also, that we're out there trying to figure out why an animal died and what kind of animal it was and where it was. And we do get to go out and see whales, not daily as often as I'd like, but we do get to spend time on the water. And these are a group of humpback whales that are actually off of Chatham feeding during the summertime. So it's kind of how we do our work and what we're working on. But we're here today to talk about Nantucket Sound, and are there marine mammals commonly found in Nantucket Sound? And Audra's already kind of gone over what the location looks like, and you're all, I'm sure, very familiar with it. So yes, there are marine mammals routinely found in Nantucket Sound if you're talking about pinnipeds or seals. So harbor seals, and especially gray seals, are commonly found in Nantucket Sound. And that's probably the kind of marine mammal you're most likely to encounter. They are a number of well-established gray seal haulout sites throughout the area of the Sound. So they like sandy beaches to haul out on. So they'll be in those areas of their resting areas, and then they kind of travel into the Sound to swim around and find some snacks and do what seals do. Harbor seals tend to like rocks. So I think sometimes off of Woods Hole and different places where you're having rocky outcrops, that's where they kind of like to rest. But they are commonly found there. And that is, like I said, probably if you're going to see marine mammals, that's mostly what you're going to see. Whales and dolphins, are they commonly found in the Nantucket Sound? I wouldn't say commonly, but they're not unheard of. And so they are something to keep an eye out to possibly encounter, but not with the frequency that you're going to see some of the seals out there. There was a study that was done by the Center for Coastal Studies, and they had a report coming back out in 2010, and they went through some historic data to look at any sightings of cetaceans, those are whales, dolphins, and porpoises, to see the sightings that happened in and around Nantucket Sound. And if you look, that there are a few sightings in there, a few little dots, and so I looked at to try and see what kind of species they saw. And they saw harbor porpoise. So harbor porpoise are the smallest cetaceans that we can find in our area. So all whales, dolphins, and porpoises scientifically are categorized as cetaceans. They're adorable little tooth whales. They're slightly smaller than most of the dolphins that we see around here. So they're the smallest cetacean that we have in our area. They like to eat herring primarily, or some of the schooling fish, but there's a possibility that you can encounter harbor porpoise. Minke whales, there were sightings, and there have been some strandings of minke whales in and around Nantucket Sound. They look like a big dolphin, but they're actually a little bit deceiving in their size. They can be up to 20 or 30 feet in length and weigh up to 10 tons, so they're pretty sizable. If you see one by itself, then probably it's a minke whale. Dolphins tend to travel in pods. Humpback whales, I think everybody's familiar with, and some of their favorite in the whale world are humpback whales, and they have been sighted in the Sound. And the largest whale in our area, second largest animal on the planet, and that's the fin whale. They are an endangered species, and they also have been sighted in Nantucket Sound. What was interesting to me in looking at that data, though, those data that the center had pulled, is that there were no reported sightings of longfin pilot whales in Nantucket Sound. And I know for a fact that they have been there. That was the very first stranding I ever went to. That was back in December of 1990. And we had 55 pilot whales that washed up in Nantucket Sound. Unfortunately, most of them didn't make it, but we were able to get some of them off the beach from that stranding. And it was a very cold December day. And that's the location of the stranding. So obviously they were alive when they stranded, and they did make it through Nantucket Sound. Nobody obviously reported them swimming in the Sound, but we know that they got there. Something that people do report regularly if they see them, and the National Marine Fisheries Service does encourage sightings reports of this species, and that's a critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. So they are one of the most endangered animals on the planet. They are certainly the most endangered whale on the East Coast, and one of the most endangered whales in the world. There are, by current estimates now, unfortunately, there was an 8% loss just over between 2019 and 20. Their population is now down to approximately 336 animals based on the latest estimates from the New England Aquarium, who curates the catalog for these individuals. And they are an amazing animal. They have a long history, and with us here in Massachusetts, there are logs of them in the Mayflower's log. They're one of the first whales to be hunted, and that was the original issue with why their populations diminished. Now their biggest threats are accidental entanglements in fishing gear, and also vessel strikes. And because they are so endangered, there isn't a sightings advisory system, and the National Marine Fisheries Service will actually collect all sightings of these animals and put them on a map that anybody can access. You can see the map. So I pulled those sightings data for right whales between 2010 and 2021. And obviously there's a few circles in Nantucket Sound, so they do occasionally transit through there, but they're not a species that would be seen commonly. However, if you pull the map back a little bit, and you look at the sightings through that time period around Nantucket Sound, you can see that they live pretty much in this closest proximity to the Sound as you possibly can get. And so they are in the Great Salt Channel, they're east of Cape Cod, they love Cape Cod Bay. They love right now south of the islands. It's becoming an increasingly important year-round habitat for them. But going through the actual Sound itself is a fairly infrequent event. And that's true for most large whales. And it's not because it's shallow. It's not because of land masses that are there. I've seen whales in 10 or 15 feet of water. It's probably because it's a little bit warmer in there. And when I was a kid growing up, it was a big, huge treat for my parents to take us down to Silver Beach because that was the warm water as opposed to the Cape Cod Bayside. So it's clearly got a much nicer, warmer water atmosphere. It's not that whales have a problem being in warm water. In fact, humpback whales migrate to the Caribbean in the wintertime, so it's not an issue for them as far as warm water. It's an issue for their food. So whales come up to this area to eat. That's why they're here. So the northeast part of the US is basically a seasonal feeding habitat for large whale species. And they go where food goes. And the most of the food that these guys like to eat kind of like to be cold. So that's their preference. And so if they're not going to be found in Nantucket Sound, if it's a little too warm for them, I love that the creators of SpongeBob actually modeled the character Sheldon Plankton after a real copepod. So it's that oblong body, that one red eye, the two antennae. This is right whale food. It's about the size of a grain of rice. And they eat aggregations of copepods every day. And those are very temperature sensitive, and they will go, like I said, Cape Cod Bay, south of the islands. But you don't find these huge calinous aggregations within Nantucket Sound. Now, the fish-eating large whales like minkies and fin whales and humpback whales, they like schooling fish like herring and mackerel, and they in particular like this little guy here. This is a sand lance, and they burrow into the sand, and they are also rather temperature sensitive and prefer cooler water. So whales are going where food is and what their preferential food is. And that's why they're around the sound probably more than in it. Having said that, though, it would be interesting to see what happens is we see more of this fish. And this is a menhaden, so I think in the Mid-Atlantic, they call them bunker. We're starting to see more of them moving north as the water warms. They actually kind of like warm water. And they have had a substantial recovery thanks to some really effective fishery management in the Mid-Atlantic. And so I pulled some maps there, and there's increasing trends of where menhaden are being found, and you can start to see it creeping up into the Buzzards Bay and toward the Nantucket Sound area. So it's possible that if menhaden start to occupy habitats around here, that's really what the whales care about, or at least the whales like the humpbacks and the minkies and the fin whales that are eating fish. So if there's food available, then that's where they're going to go. And that's probably what brought this guy into Nantucket Sound in 2018. So this is the humpback whale. I found this on YouTube, and it was a video on YouTube of a humpback whale that you could see some lunch feeding behavior. And chances are, that would be my guess, that it was feeding on menhaden. We see that a lot in the Mid-Atlantic, especially with the juvenile humpbacks taking advantage of those schools of menhaden. So something to kind of watch as things are shifting here moving forward. It's probably also what brought these dolphins into a cove in Martha's Vineyard just last month. So this was also on YouTube. I found it, and these are common dolphins that were videotaped very close to shore. And again, chances are that that's what they're going after. Again, they're coming in looking for food. And if the schools of fish, we certainly saw that even on the bay side, we were getting schools of menhaden coming in pretty close last month. So that's my guess as to why they were there. And if they're there, and if menhaden come in, then you'll start to see more of these critters. The reason that I said that it may not matter if they're in the sound, as long as they're around the sound, and the sound will continue to benefit from that, is because the currents obviously move around and around the islands and around the backside and come into the sound itself. And you can see that the little arrows were looking at these water currents. And the reason that that's important goes back to the fact that whales are here because they need to eat, and that's what they're coming here to do. Whales, like a humpback whale, will eat 1 to several tons of food a day while it's up here during the feeding season, somewhere between April and November. They migrate down to the Dominican Republic for this population. So they're going down to nice crystal clear warm water in the winter. That's where the calves are born. Not a great place to eat, though. So this is their feeding area. They eat as much as they can while they're here to get as fat as they can so that they can migrate and live off of that body fat. So blubber kind of works as both of a sort of a jacket and a lunchbox. It does keep them warm, but it's also their food supply when they're out of this range. So they want to build up that blubber as much as they can while they're here. Now the important part, and the part that I find most fascinating, and perhaps it's a biology thing, my background's in biology and chemistry, and I'm assuming that it's after 6 and people have had their dinner, so this is appropriate to talk about now. What goes in must come out. And that's the part that makes whales so amazing. So whales have to eat, but they also have to go to the bathroom. And the fact that they go to the bathroom is one of the things that we should be most grateful for, that they're using the waters in and around Nantucket Sound is their private bathroom is so important to the environment. There's a ton of research coming out. It started around 2010 with Dr. Joe Roman. He had published this paper called The Whale Pump, and he's still doing amazing work. Heidi Pearson in Alaska is doing some incredible work. There's a lot of people looking at this right now, but what the ecological role is of whales in our environment and how they really benefit the planet. Whales have this amazing physiology. They're mammals. They can dive to amazing depths. But what happens when they're diving to all these depths is they have to change their physiology so that they're literally kind of moving blood sources away from their digestive process to help them secure that ability to dive. And they're storing oxygen in their muscles, and they do this really cool stuff to be able to dive. But that means that kind of like you're not going to worry about digesting food. So you can go down really deep and find food and eat it, but bathroom breaks are always at the surface. And those bathroom breaks are where the whales serve as the ocean's gardeners. So if you think about a plant and you want to put plant food in it, if you think about the roots of your plants or your trees outside and that they need nutrients, you think about any of if you're, like I said, gardening and you're fertilizing it, that's important because plants need food. And the way that they process food is through a chemical reaction called photosynthesis. So they take the energy from the sun and they mix it with some chemicals like phosphorus and nitrogen and iron. And then they get their food and they give off oxygen when they do that. Phytoplankton are these tiny microscopic like plant organisms. They're single cell organisms and they live near the ocean surface. They have to live in the photic zone where the sun can penetrate. So they can't root into the soil. So gravity takes all those nutrients and puts them at the bottom. Somebody needs to bring them back up to the surface so that those nutrients can get back up to the phytoplankton. And whales are one of the key ways that happens. So when they take these bathroom breaks at the surface, they're literally gardening this ocean forest near the surface. So they're releasing nitrogen, they're releasing iron, they're releasing phosphorus, all the stuff that's really helpful in that chemical reaction. And when they do that, they help to sustain phytoplankton. And why that matters is because phytoplankton are the grasslands of the ocean. They are the thing that the little tiny zooplankton eat, and then that's what the small fish eat, and then the small fish get eaten by larger fish. And so they are the very base of the food web in the ocean. So we need phytoplankton. We also need phytoplankton kind of because we like to breathe. So about at least probably every other breath you take is produced by phytoplankton in the ocean. So that's a byproduct of photosynthesis. Phytoplankton is good for us breathing. Phytoplankton also has this really sort of interesting life cycle of a really solid 1 to 3 days. They take in a lot of carbon from the atmosphere as part of that photosynthetic process. And when they die, they sink with that carbon. And so they sequester carbon in the ocean. So they are nature's answer in some respects to climate change, or one of the answers, I should say. They can't keep up with it right now. But if we could get it to a point where they could keep up with it, it'd be awesome. So whales help phytoplankton. We need phytoplankton, so therefore we need whales. So it's a very cool thing that we have all these whales in a feeding area around Nantucket Sound because they're doing this amazing, amazing job. So, you know, whales are here to eat. Like I said, bathroom breaks are at the surface. That's what is, those nutrients are sustaining the phytoplankton. They are gardening this sea of phytoplankton. Gives you oxygen to breathe, helps to sustain fish stocks, incredibly important, and helps to mitigate climate change. So the role that whales play ecologically in our system is incredibly, incredibly important. And we are working with some researchers as our global office is trying to really sort of come up with what those values are. But based on some of the data that's initially come out, these climate giants are doing an amazing job. So on average, every whale is helping to remove as much carbon from our atmosphere as about 30,000 trees. So it's pretty impressive. Many whale populations were diminished because of whaling, some by 90%, and many of them are still struggling to recover. So even right whales clearly are struggling to recover. Humpbacks in our population are nowhere near where they were prior to large-scale whaling and fin whales. So we have a long way to go to sort of build up these populations to get them back to being able to do their jobs in the ocean. And that's super, super important for us. So that's why we do what we do. So that's why we do go out on the boat and we do take data and we do try and monitor these populations. It's why we're responding to the stranded animals to find out where they are and what they're doing. And it's why I spend so much time on a computer going through a variety of reports and data, because it does matter. Like they have a tremendous, tremendous impact on our environment. Well, one of the things that we're doing right now, as I said, is that we just started a stranding program in an agreement with NOAA. We are looking to our stranding regions on the Cape Cod Bayside. You do have stranding responders down in the Nantucket Sound side too, we'll talk about in a minute. But it really does help us figure out when different species are in the area, how they're doing, what might have happened, why they stranded. So those data are extremely important. We're also working with fishermen to do gear research. So entanglements are accidental. No fisherman in the entire world is intentionally entangling these animals. It's a terrible accident. When they encounter the gear, they often roll into it. And it's a loss for the fishermen as they lose their gear. It's a horrible way to die for a whale. It takes on average about 6 months, and they typically die either from being emaciated because they can't eat, or from infections that result as the gear can literally sour into bone and tissue. So it's a lose-lose situation when entanglements happen. And what we're looking for is the win-win. So we're working with a team of scientists and fishermen and other conservation groups to try and test some alternative gear. We're calling on-demand gear. And what it does is it actually has an acoustic signal that brings that rope to the surface, so that the rope isn't in the water, that vertical buoy line isn't in the water, unless the fisherman is on site and calls it up to be able to haul that gear. So other than that, it would sit at the bottom and whales would be able to swim around it without a problem, and fishermen would still be able to fish in those same areas without being shut out. We are also working to try and reduce vessel strikes. Again, not intentional by any means, but they do unfortunately happen. And they can be damaging to the vessel and the passengers as well as to the whale. So we're trying to figure out ways to mitigate that situation, slowing down, just sort of like slowing down in school zones. Slowing down to about 10 knots seems to give the whale time to avoid the vessel, and also if a collision does occur, is substantially less likely to kill the whale and less likely to damage the boat. So slow down zones do work. We have a couple of programs that we work with NOAA. One is See a Spot, Watch Out, where we're working with recreational vessels to try and get better habits of how to safely operate around areas where whales are. And Whale Sense, which is one that we work with commercial whale watch companies on the East Coast and Southeast Alaska to try and make sure that those boats are not only just going out taking people to see whales, they're doing it safely, and they're actually doing a little bit more. They all have projects that they're going above and beyond if they're part of this program. Lastly, I think that the next question I usually get from everybody is that what can I do to help? Like what is there for me to do? And I think I've kind of narrowed it down to two things, and that's basically report and or support. And both of those things are incredibly, incredibly important to do. So reporting stranded marine mammals is key. Like I said, there's lots of information that comes from it. There's lots of ways to help by doing that. And there's a few organizations in the Nantucket Sound area that respond to stranding. So if you're on the mainland side of Nantucket Sound and you find a stranded animal or an animal in distress, then the International Fund for Animal Welfare does respond to strandings in that area, and they have a hotline number, and they will send somebody out, they will send staff out, they do an amazing job. They're a wonderful organization, and they respond to strandings there. On Nantucket also has a stranding network, who also is very busy and doing a great job. It's the Marine Mammal Alliance of Nantucket, and they also have a stranding hotline, and if you call them, they will go out and do what they can to try and help any of the animals that are in that area. On Martha's Vineyard, right now, you should call NOAA's hotline, and they do have people that are on the island that they can get in touch with, who can also respond to strandings, who are trained. So that's a super simple way to really make a difference, and just reporting. That's a big deal. For those of you that are not just on the beach, but are on the water, reporting live sightings of right whales and entangled whales or turtles also really helps. And if you see a right whale, simply calling that hotline number they will put that whale sighting on the map. They will keep track of it. It makes a big deal for us to understand where the species is moving and when they're in the area. So super simple thing to make a phone call. Report entangled marine animals. The Center for Coastal Studies has a world-renowned disentanglement team. They established the whole protocols for how to disentangle animals. It is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. It's an incredibly important thing to do, and they have a permit from the federal government, and they are some of the most dedicated and amazing people I think are on the Cape. And they will come out and they will respond to any entangled marine animal. So I know that there's been quite a few turtle sightings in Nantucket Sound, but also they disentangle large marine animals as well. If you don't have your cell phone, you can call the Coast Guard on VHF 16, and they will relay the message to the center. And of course, there's an app for that. There's an app for pretty much everything. But Whale Alert is an app that you can download on your phone. And it's a way for you to be able to see where right whales have been seen. You can report right whale sightings. You can report entangled whales through the app. So there's multiple ways that you could really make an impact simply by reporting. And I also put in there support. And there's lots and lots of ways to support as well. And one of the ways that I was hearing Audra talk about some of the work that the Alliance is doing, and you know, the need for them to get that kind of support from their members, and responding to action alerts to an organization that you know is a big deal. Like it helps. They know who to talk to. They know what needs to be done. So if you have an organization like the Alliance or another organization that you feel like they're working in a good direction, responding to those action alerts, signing their petitions. I wouldn't say the general petitions that often you can find online, but find one that you trust. Those names do get added. They do help, and they do show elected officials that there's a whole constituency of people that care. Sharing information, that's kind of seems silly, but it really does make a big deal. We just had a conversation in our office the other day about whether you would buy something that a company told you to buy, or would you buy something that was recommended by, you know, a fellow mom that bought something for their child. And, you know, word of mouth and trust is a big deal. And so if you have friends or family and you're telling them that information, they're going to listen to it a lot more than if I tell them, because they don't know me. So I think, you know, sharing information, whether it's through social media, whether it's a dinner at Thanksgiving, those conversations do really add up and really make changes. Volunteering, there's tons of really amazing organizations all around the Cape, and nonprofits, and we rely also on volunteers. So if you have some time, doesn't have to be 40 hours a week, but find out if they need volunteer positions, and taking some of your time and donating it to the organization really can make a huge difference. And of course, if you can give what you can, and everybody is in different circumstances, and I think that there's lots of different ways to give. Financial support's one way, but like I said, volunteering, talking, responding to action alerts, there's lots of different ways that you can support organizations. I would only say that that I really think you should choose a charity that aligns with your goals and the way that you work. We often, in my world, work toward the same goals, but we don't always necessarily go in the same, have the same road or path to get there. And so finding the organization that has your same sort of goals and that your same sort of, culture and way of working, I think is really important. For instance, for us, we want to mitigate entanglements, but we want to work with the industry to do that. So we are not an organization who wants to shut down fishing. And I do know that there's other organizations that are promoting, boycotts, and that's not our way of doing it. But there's people who think that that's a better way to do it, and that's fine. But just make sure that you know which organization you're going to so that they're aligning with your values. Ultimately, we're in this for the same end game, but sometimes our pathways are different. And I realize I just talked really, really, really fast, but that was my presentation. So I'd be very, very happy to take questions, which is, I think, a much more comfortable thing for me to do anyway.
Well, that was great. Thank you. I know I certainly learned a lot, and we have a number of questions. I'm going to start with one I have.
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Wait a second here. Maybe if you stop sharing the screen, maybe that'll. We're gonna have to learn to read Regina's lips. Can you hear now? Nope. Just give it a second. You're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Sorry, I lost sound for a minute. I'm going to try this. I apologize.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Anyways, I was just saying that was really interesting, and I have a number of questions from the audience, but I wanted to ask one first. So you said that a whale can remove on average the carbon equivalent of 30,000 trees, or what 30,000 trees would do. And my question is that based on the type of whale or the size of the whale? Like, what are there specific types of whales?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one of the things that we're trying to work with some of these researchers to get a better answer to that. So the studies that have been done have been on very large whales, some on right whales, some on blue whales. So the size difference obviously is pretty substantial between a right whale being 50 feet long and over 50 tons to a blue whale that can be 80, 90 feet long. So that's a broad average based on the data that are out there. So we're talking about big whales, but to specifically say, hey, a humpback does this and a blue whale does that, we haven't quite got to that point now. So we do have, like I said, a collaboration with a number of the different researchers that have been looking into this to try and answer some of those more specific questions.
Okay, I'm now from the audience. First question from Anne. She's interested in knowing how many female right whales are there currently of that population that you mentioned.
That's a great question. In the last, I hate to ever give definitive numbers because we don't know for certain, but the last estimate was probably only around 70. So it's and for those that are calving females, so not a lot. And one of the big concerns with right whales is that the females are disproportionately impacted by some of these threats. So females, especially pregnant females or mother-calf pairs, like to spend more time at or near the surface, and they're not easy to see, and so that they're more susceptible to getting hit by vessels. And so that's kind of like a kind of check against them, and they get more impacted that way. Entanglements, there's probably a 50-50 chance that a male or a female could run into fishing gear. The difference is that if a female runs into fishing gear, there are what are called sublethal impacts. And what that does is that a female, if she gets wrapped up in fishing gear, even if she gets out, is less likely to have a calf successfully. So it changes the years between how frequently she can give birth. And so birthing intervals should be like every 3 or 4 years. They're going up between like 4 and 10 years. And if a female's been entangled, then she's not as likely to be able to sustain that pregnancy if she does get pregnant, or she's not even sometimes able to get pregnant. So entanglements can have an impact even if they get out of the gear of they're just not going to get as fat because they have this extra weight that they're dragging around, and it's causing this additional burden. And if you're a marathon runner, if you're a female marathon runner, sometimes you stop ovulating just because your body fat gets to so low that you don't trigger those hormones to ovulate anymore. So if you've got these right whales that just aren't getting, these females that aren't getting fat enough, they're also not triggering those hormones. So they're, like I said, they're not as likely to get pregnant. So there definitely is a disproportionate impact of threats on females in the population than on males.
So Regina, what's the minimum number of female right whales that you would need to have to be sustainable or even to grow the population?
That's a great question. And, I don't ever want to find out because I don't want to get that low. But there have been species, elephant seals, there have been species that have gotten through these genetic bottlenecks with these really, really, really low populations. So it doesn't seem to be a factor of inbreeding. So it's not that you just have so many few females that you can't do it. It's really the ultimate goal is to have more kids born than die that, or adults die that year from a threat. So if we could just kind of reverse the curve of, we've had our first calf born this season this year that was seen off South Carolina. So that's awesome. And if we could have, 30 calves born, but, not only have 1 or 2 die accidentally, right, we can start to build that up. So really that's the ratio that we're looking for. So if we had a few females, but they're reproductively active, it'd probably be okay if we could move the threats away. It just isn't, and the genetic component is of a concern at this point than that ratio of calves versus deaths.
How big is a calf when it's born?
So they can be 12, 14, 15 feet long and weigh about a ton or more.
Wow.
Nuggets, yeah.
Okay. Sherry is asking if right whales are specifically avoiding Nantucket Sound because of the warm water, are they more likely to be seen there in the fall or spring? We saw several pods of porpoise in Edgartown Harbor this month. Are they also attracted to cold water?
So again, it's not really the water temperature for the whales. So right whales hang out in Florida, off coastal Florida. They'll go down as far as Miami. We had a cow-calf go up into the Gulf of Mexico last year. They're not averse to warm water. They're here to eat, and what they like to eat tends to choose the cooler water, with the exception of that menhaden. So if you saw the dolphins or some porpoises coming in to Edgartown or to the Nantucket Sound area, that's telling me that there was food there. And if there's food there, it's telling me that it probably wasn't sand lance or herring, because they tend not to like the warmer water. It probably was menhaden. So right whales may transit through Nantucket Sound. And again, there's not regular surveys going on there. And I think that that's important as well. There's not somebody looking every day. Certainly the ferry going by is, I would assume that if there were regular sightings of whales, the ferries would be seeing them and reporting them. But there aren't tremendous amounts of surveys, but it's all food. It's just the whole New England area for a whale is just a big restaurant. And so they're just going to go where the food is.
Okay. An anonymous attendee is asking, can the acoustic signal method that's being tested out to prevent entanglements disrupt the way aquatic mammals navigate or communicate with one another?
That's a great question. So what the acoustic releases that are happening now are not pinging all the time. They are just there's an app that we have on a tablet that was created by a company called EdgeTech in Wareham, and the fisherman just presses the app and that sends one signal down, releases it. So it's not this constant interruption of sound. It's a pretty quick one-off only when the fisherman's on site. So there's not a lot of disruption, I think, that would have with that. There is an effort right now to try and figure out how to do something called geolocation, so that anybody using this anywhere in the world would be able to say, like, sit on their computer and say, hey, I know where my gear is. And that would be a little bit of a different situation where the signal might be happening more frequently. And that's one of the things those researchers at Woods Hole, Dr. Mark Baumgartner, and some other folks are working on figuring out what that would look like, and how that kind of process would be in the ocean without creating, and sonifying the ocean to a point where it's disruptive. But the stuff that EdgeTech has created that we're working with right now is not constantly pinging. It's just going out and, like I said, it's one ping when you want the app to release the buoy.
Okay. I know you went through this, but maybe it's worth repeating. It says, if someone is on Nantucket and finds a stranded marine mammal, who might they contact first? Police, harbor master? Who would have the best contacts on the island?
The Marine Mammal Alliance of Nantucket, they have an authorization from NOAA. Just call them directly, and they will absolutely go out and respond. They coordinate with the island's officials. They would coordinate with animal control or the police or anything else that they needed to, if they needed help. But they are one-stop shopping, and they should be your first stop. And
you probably have that information on your website somewhere as well.
Yeah, so I can find I can look in the stranding stuff where NOAA has everyone's numbers listed, so no matter where you are, we can get you a number.
Okay. Sherry is asking, what's the difference between dolphin and porpoise, or are they the same thing?
Love that question. So I don't know if the chat can go to everybody. Sorry, I'm just trying to put it in there, but we can share it afterwards, Audrey, if you want.
Yep, I think so.
There is a difference. It's not set in stone, and there's always exceptions to every rules. But in general, porpoises are smaller than dolphins. Porpoises tend to have a flatter face, while dolphins tend to have more of a beak that sticks out, and the shape of their teeth are different. And so porpoises tend to have spade or more flatter teeth, and dolphins tend to have more rounder conical teeth. So those are sort of the guidelines between what we would call, if we're calling something a porpoise or a dolphin.
Interesting. Another question is asking, do you also work in Narragansett Bay? And if not, are there similar organizations that work there?
So our work, I wouldn't say we do any work specifically in Narragansett Bay. So for any of the policy work that we're doing on right whales, it doesn't matter where they are, we're gonna work on that. But there are organizations down in Rhode Island that are doing some work down there. Audubon, trying to think of, they're in Bristol, but the Audubon Education Center in Bristol, Rhode Island they have a great organization, and they do some really cool work down there too. So they probably could give you the more information on some of the Rhode Island groups.
Okay. Another question, which you probably went over, but again, what efforts is your organization making towards saving those mammals who are endangered?
So we're really focusing. So we have on the East Coast, we have a big focus on North Atlantic right whales. On the West Coast, we're focusing on southern resident orca or killer whales, and the threats are a little bit different for those. So on the West Coast, we're working part of collaboratives with salmon groups to try and do dam removal, because their biggest threat on the West Coast, therefore, the southern resident orca are prey depletion, habitat depletion. Largely because of lots and lots of dams that block salmon habitat. It's going to take a while for those salmon to recover, but southern residents are pretty picky eaters. So trying to get their food supply back up and running is a priority for there. For the East Coast, for North Atlantic right whales in particular, again, it's the vessel strikes and the entanglements are their two biggest threats. So we are federally appointed to something called the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team, and we serve in an advisory capacity to the National Marine Fisheries Service to help them try and figure out how to create new policies to reduce entanglements. And there are fishermen on it, there are state and federal managers on it, there are scientists and conservationists, and the effort is to try and build consensus agreements to come up with new measures to be able to reduce entanglements. Like I said, we've got this project that we're working on collaboratively, trying to work with some fishermen in the lobster industry to test some of this gear to see how they can improve it. And they have been amazing. These guys have really and using this gear have come up with some really innovative ways to make it better. So we're pretty excited about that. And for vessel strikes, we are trying to work with the boating community through, like I said, Sea Spout and Whale Sense, but we also have petitioned the government to review some of the slow zones that they have for right whales right now and adapt them, because right whales have shifted habitat over the past 10 years, and really kind of review where those areas should be to be the most protected that they can be.
Regina, for the right whales, is it vessel strikes or entanglements that are causing the larger threat, just in terms of, you know, mortality?
It depends on the year and the day,
Okay.
but you know, based on some of the cryptic mortality data that the National Marine Fisheries Service on their Science Center has released, it looks like we do a better job at identifying and recovering animals from vessel strikes than we do from entanglements and the bodies of them. So sometimes the count looks like it's biased toward vessel strikes, but in fact, we just don't recover a lot of the entangled animals. And that's because when they're entangled, then they tend to get really skinny and they swim away, and they're just never seen again. Their bodies probably sink. So we're probably more likely to locate and identify an animal who was killed abruptly by a vessel strike because it's going to float, versus an animal who's been sort of languishing from an infection. They're going to just sort of disappear. So we seem to undercount entanglements, and probably, but you know, it may be that the bias is toward entanglement impacts right now. Vessel strike are certainly still a significant problem though.
And you mentioned a little bit ago that you're working on the East Coast with the North Atlantic right whales and on the West Coast with orcas or killer whales. What's the relative population of the orcas versus the right whales?
So the southern resident, it's a distinct population of southern resident orca that there's there fluctuates between 72 and 74. And they were the orca that were featured in Blackfish, that population, and had significant impacts from the 60s and early 70s from wild captures to be taken into captivity. And then, so it's usually similar to what happens with right whales is, you know, what took them down in the first place was whaling. You stop whaling, but these other threats come in and sort of replace them and don't let them recover. That was kind of a similar thing with the southern resident orcas, is these wild captures for captivity had a significant impact on the populations, but they're not recovering now because of prey depletion, because of some of the habitat issues with salmon depletion in the area. So it's kind of like they got suppressed for one reason, but then they get held down for another. So I think both populations though are incredibly viable and can, you know, recover. They are not, it's not hopeless. We just need to stop the problems that exist and let them recover.
Right. Okay. Well, we are coming up against 7 o'clock. So I thought that was really fascinating. I know I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did also. So I very much appreciate you being here tonight and talking about marine mammals.
I really appreciate the opportunity to do it, because I just love talking about whale poop. So thank you for having me.
We saw that. Perfect. Thank you so much. So anyway, thank you also to our audience for joining us. And Regina had said different ways you could help their organization, and one of them was action alerts. And so just a couple of things, if you want to stay in touch with us, that's our address, and I'm audra@saveoursound.org. You can also follow us on social media. And we have recently launched a major grassroots campaign to draw more awareness to Nantucket Sound and the urgency to protect it. So we have launched a newly designed website. We have some TV ads running across the Cape and Islands on Comcast channels. You can also see them on our website, which is saveoursound.org. And we have a petition that's going that basically would send a letter to your local elected officials. So if you would like to help, and you can tell your local elected officials very easily that you support permanent protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound, you can just go to saveoursound.org/petition, and it takes literally less than a minute. You put in your email address, your town, and pretty much hit "I'm not a robot" and submit. And that would be a big help to us. Also, you're more than willing to, or we're more than willing to take donations. So if you want to help that way, also you can get information on saveoursound.org. So we've had 8 or 9 of these webinars over this year. I think we'll take a break in December for the holidays, and we'll be back in January. So check our website, follow us, and we really appreciate your interest in what we do, what Regina does, and in protecting and preserving Nantucket Sound. So have a great night. Thank you. Thanks, Regina.